Our 10th anniversary was hours away, a celebration of the perfect man I married. But a mysterious call from a restaurant manager shattered the illusion, warning me to come alone and, whatever I did, not to tell my husband. The scent of lilies, Mark's favorite apology flower, still hung in the air. Not that he had anything to apologize for. He'd sent them to my office yesterday with a simple card that read, "For the best 10 years of my life, the next 10 will be even better. M." Our 10th anniversary was tonight, and my heart was doing this ridiculous, fluttery thing it hadn't done since our first date. Mark was the kind of husband romance novels are written about, attentive, wildly successful, and still looked at me like I was the only woman in a crowded room. He'd handled all the arrangements for tonight, just telling me to be ready by 7 for a surprise. I knew, of course, where we were going. It had to be La Belle Époque, the ridiculously fancy French restaurant where he'd first told me he loved me over a shared crème brûlée. I was just putting the finishing touches on my makeup, a soft, smoky eye that had taken 3 tutorials and a lot of patience when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, filled with the faint clatter of what sounded like kitchen noises. Then a man's voice, low and hurried. "Is this Sarah Jennings?" "Yes, it is. Who's this?" "My name is Julian. I'm the manager at La Belle Époque." A smile touched my lips. "Oh. Well, I think I have an idea why you're calling. We'll be there at 7:30. Is my husband trying to arrange something special? You can tell me, I'll act surprised." I chuckled, expecting him to join in. He didn't. The line was silent for a beat too long. "Mrs. Jennings," he said, and all traces of warmth were gone from his voice. It was flat, serious. "I'm not calling about your reservation tonight. I'm calling about your husband's reservation from 2 nights ago." My smile faded. 2 nights ago? You must be mistaken. My husband was on a business trip in Chicago. He just got back this morning." "He was here, Mrs. Jennings, at his usual table by the window." My hand holding the phone started to feel cold. His usual table? We've only been there a handful of times. "Mrs. Jennings, I need you to listen to me very carefully," the manager Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We had an incident. Company policy requires us to review security footage. We saw something involving your husband." I sank down onto the edge of the bed, my silk dress crinkling beneath me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of his words. An incident? What kind of incident? Did Mark get into an argument? Did he drop a plate? It all sounded so absurd. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with me?" "We have the recording," he said, ignoring my question. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "You need to see it, but you need to do exactly as I say. This is for your own protection." Protection? My heart started a frantic, painful thudding against my ribs. Protection from what? What happened? "I can't discuss it over the phone. You have to come here, watch the recording, but you must come alone. And under no circumstances can you tell your husband about this call. Do you understand me, Mrs. Jennings? Do not tell your husband." The command was so sharp, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. Every instinct screamed that this was a prank, a cruel, elaborate joke, but the dead seriousness in the man's voice, the chilling specificity of his instructions, it felt terrifyingly real. My perfect romantic evening, my perfect 10-year anniversary, was suddenly shrouded in a dark, suffocating fog of dread. Why would a restaurant manager call me with a warning like this? What could Mark have possibly done that required such secrecy? I looked at the framed photo on our bedside table, use on our honeymoon in Italy, laughing, sun-kissed, and so deeply in love. The man in that picture wasn't capable of anything that would warrant this kind of cloak and dagger phone call. He just wasn't. "When?" I managed to whisper, my throat tight. "Now, come now. Use the service entrance at the back of the building. I'll be waiting." He hung up before I could ask another question. I stared at the phone, my reflection a pale, distorted mask on the dark screen. My husband was due home any minute, ready to whisk me away to our anniversary dinner. But a stranger was waiting for me in a back alley, holding a recording that he claimed I needed to see. A recording of the man I loved, on a night he was supposed to be 1,000 miles away. I stood up, my legs trembling. There was a choice to be made, right here, right now. I could ignore the call, dismiss it as a sick prank, and step into the shower to get ready for the man I trusted with my entire life. Or I could slip out the back door into the cold afternoon and go see what was on that recording. The warning echoed in my head, a drumbeat of fear. Come alone. Don't tell your husband. I grabbed my car keys, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of betrayal and terror. I had to know. I had to see. The service alley behind La Belle Époque smelled of stale champagne and grease. It was a world away from the glamorous, chandelier-lit dining room I remembered. A man in a crisp black suit stepped out from a doorway, his face etched with a grim expression. It was Julian. He nodded at me once, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite decipher. Pity, maybe. He didn't say a word, just held the door open and led me through a maze of stainless steel kitchens, the sounds of prep work for the evening service clattering around us. We entered a small, windowless office. A laptop sat open on the desk, its screen dark. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Jennings," he said, finally breaking the silence. He gestured for me to sit. I wouldn't have called if it wasn't absolutely necessary. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did he do?" Julian's gaze flickered to the laptop. He took a deep breath, like a man preparing to deliver a fatal blow. It's better if you just see for yourself. He moved the mouse and the screen flickered to life, showing a video file. The timestamp in the corner read 2 nights ago. The camera angle was from a high corner, looking down at a familiar secluded table by a large window. Mark's table, my table. He pointed the remote at the screen. "What you're about to see," he said, his voice heavy with dread, "happened 2 nights ago, right there, at your table." He pressed play. My breath hitched in my throat. There, on the screen, was my husband, Mark. He looked exactly as he always did before a big meeting, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his hair perfectly styled, but with a tension in his shoulders that I knew so well. He was checking his watch, then his phone, then scanning the restaurant entrance. He was waiting for someone. He was supposed to be in Chicago, giving a keynote speech. He had even sent me a selfie from his hotel room that morning. The lie was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut, but the pain was just beginning. A minute later, a woman slid into the booth opposite him. My world tilted on its axis. She was beautiful, of course, a stunning redhead in a sleek black dress, the kind of woman who turns heads without trying. My mind immediately supplied the narrative. This was it. The reason for the secret trip, the lie, the hushed phone calls I'd occasionally overheard and dismissed as work. This was the affair. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the arms of the chair to steady myself. 10 years. 10 years of trust and love, vaporized by a grainy security video in a back office that smelled of bleach. But as I kept watching, forcing my eyes to stay open, the narrative started to fall apart. This wasn't a lover's tryst. Mark didn't smile when she arrived. He didn't lean in to kiss her cheek. His posture was rigid, almost fearful. The woman's expression was cold, all business. There was no warmth between them, no flirtatious glances, only a palpable, icy tension that even the silent video couldn't hide. She spoke, gesturing sharply with her hand, and Mark just listened, his jaw tight. He looked like a man being reprimanded, not a man on a romantic rendezvous. Then she slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Mark's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. He didn't open it. He just clutched it, placing it on the seat beside him as if it were a venomous snake. They spoke for a few moments more. The woman stood up, her movements fluid and decisive. She leaned over the table, and for a terrifying second, I thought she was going to kiss him. Instead, she whispered something in his ear. I couldn't see Mark's face clearly, but his entire body flinched. He recoiled as if she'd slapped him. The woman simply straightened up, turned, and walked away without a backward glance. As she passed a sconce on the wall, the light caught her face in perfect profile for a fraction of a second. The nausea returned, 100 times worse. It wasn't a stranger. It was my sister, Emily. I must have made a sound, a choked gasp, because Julian paused the video. My sister. My younger sister who lived 3 states away, the one who'd been my maid of honor, the one Mark had always treated with a slightly formal, brotherly affection. What in God's name was she doing here, meeting my husband in secret, handing him a mysterious envelope and making him flinch in fear? The pieces didn't fit. Nothing made sense. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting, trying to connect dots that were light years apart. That's my sister," I stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. "Why is she with my husband?" Julian's face was grim. He looked at me with an unnerving intensity. "That's what we were hoping you could tell us, Mrs. Jennings. But that meeting, as strange as it is, wasn't the incident I called you about. That was just the beginning." My blood ran cold. The beginning of what? He didn't answer. He just let his gaze drift back to the laptop screen, to the frozen image of my sister walking away. He took a slow, deliberate breath before speaking again. "I need you to prepare yourself. What you saw was disturbing. What comes next is worse." He pressed the play button again. The video resumed. Mark sat alone at the table for a long time, his head in his hands. He looked utterly destroyed. He finally straightened up, picked up the envelope, and was about to stand when another figure entered the frame. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a predatory stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He approached Mark's table from the dimly lit rear of the restaurant. His face was obscured by shadow and the poor quality of the camera. He sat down opposite my husband without an invitation. Mark looked up, and a look of pure, undiluted terror washed over his face. The two men began to talk, or rather the new man talked, and Mark just stared, his face ashen. "This is the incident," Julian said, his voice a low murmur beside me. He leaned in, using the mouse to zoom in on the second man's face, but the image just dissolved into a mess of pixels. "Watch what happens when your husband tries to leave." On screen, Mark pushed his chair back, making to stand. The new man's hand shot out, grabbing Mark's wrist in a grip that looked painfully tight. A struggle ensued. It was brief, violent, and horrifyingly one-sided. The man twisted Mark's arm, forcing him back into his seat. He leaned in close, his face still maddeningly unclear, and said something that made Mark freeze completely. Then, the man calmly reached over, picked up the manila envelope my sister had delivered, and tucked it inside his own jacket. He patted Mark's cheek in a gesture that was both familiar and menacing, then stood up and walked away, disappearing into the same shadows from which he'd emerged. "Who is that man?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What did he do to Mark?" Julian was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the screen. He rewound the footage a few seconds to the moment the man first approached the table. He paused it, trying again to zoom in on the face. It was still just a blur of shadow and light. "We don't know who he is," Julian said softly. "We were hoping you might. He seemed to know your husband, and your husband was terrified of him." He let the video play in slow motion, the man's approach, the grab, the menacing pat on the cheek. Then he froze the frame again, at the clearest, most direct angle he could get of the stranger's face. It was still grainy, indistinct, but something about the shape of his head, the set of his shoulders. It sparked a flicker of recognition deep in the recesses of my memory, a ghost from a past I thought was long buried. Julian saw the change in my expression. He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Look closely, Mrs. Jennings. Look at his posture, the way he carries himself. Have you ever seen this man before?" I stared at the blurry figure on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. the posture, the confident, almost arrogant set of his shoulders. It was like looking at a phantom from a nightmare I hadn't had in over a decade. The memory surfaced, thick and suffocating as mud. It wasn't a man I knew from my life with Mark. It was a man from my life before Mark. Leo, I breathed, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Leo was my ex-boyfriend, a charismatic sociopath I dated in college. Our relationship had ended in a firestorm of threats and restraining orders after I discovered the true nature of his business loan sharking, intimidation, a world of violence I'd naively mistaken for edgy charm. I hadn't seen or heard from him in 12 years. I thought he was in prison. Julian's eyes widened. You know him? He's my ex, I said, the words feeling foreign and dangerous. Leo Costello, he's a very dangerous man. What does he want with my husband? Suddenly, the pieces began to click into place, forming a picture more horrifying than I could have imagined. My sister Emily had always been reckless, always attracted to the wrong kind of men. After I left Leo, she had, for a time, been infatuated with him, blinded by his smooth talk and promises of excitement. Had she stayed in touch with him all these years? In the envelope, it wasn't a lover's secret. It was a payment, a payoff. My mind raced back through the past few years. Mark's company had taken a huge hit during the last recession. He'd been so stressed, working impossible hours. He'd told me they'd secured a last-minute private investor, a silent partner who had saved them from bankruptcy. He'd been so vague about the details, and I, trusting him completely, had never pushed. Oh, God. The silent partner wasn't some benevolent billionaire. It was Leo. Mark hadn't sought him out. Leo must have found him, used my sister as a go-between, and sunk his venomous fangs into our lives without me ever knowing. Mark hadn't been having an affair. He'd been trapped, blackmailed, living in fear for 10 years, all to protect me from the monster in my past. The man I thought was my perfect, successful husband was actually a prisoner. I have to go, I said, standing up on shaky legs. The anniversary dinner, the silk dress, it all seemed like a scene from another woman's life. I have to get to him. Mrs. Jennings! Wait, Julian said, standing up. The police? No, I cut him off, my voice steely with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. You don't know Leo. If he thinks the police are involved, he'll hurt Mark. He'll hurt my sister. He enjoys it. This has to be handled differently. I drove home in a daze, the plan forming in my mind with chilling clarity. I walked through the front door and found Mark in the living room, pacing. He was still in his suit, his face pale and drawn. The lilies on the table suddenly seemed funereal. Sarah, there you are. I was getting worried. Are you ready? He trailed off when he saw my face. The fake cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by the bone-deep weariness I'd seen on the recording. The reservation is canceled, I said softly. I walked over to him and took his hands. They were ice cold. You can stop pretending, Mark. I know everything. His face crumpled. All the strength, all the pretense he'd been holding up for a decade collapsed in an instant. He sank onto the sofa and finally told me the truth. He told me how Leo had approached him 10 years ago, using his knowledge of me as leverage. How he'd funneled money into Mark's company, effectively owning him. How Emily, trapped by her own past mistakes with Leo, had been forced to be his messenger. The envelope contained the final payment. Mark had scraped together every last penny we had, cashed out investments to buy their freedom. But Leo wasn't the kind of man to let go. The second man at the restaurant had been one of Leo's thugs, there to take the payment and deliver a new message. The price had gone up. It would never end. As he spoke, I felt not anger or betrayal, but a fierce, protective love that burned away all the fear. He had done this for me. He had shouldered this impossible burden alone to keep my past from destroying our future. "He has Emily?" Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "He told his man at the restaurant. He's holding her until I get him more money by tomorrow morning." My plan solidified. Where? "An old warehouse downtown. He thinks I'm going to meet him with a briefcase full of cash." "You are," I said, "but you're not going alone." The next morning, Mark walked into the warehouse, just as instructed. I was 2 blocks away, parked in our car on the phone with Julian. Leo was there, just as we knew he'd be, with Emily tied to a chair and 2 of his thugs standing guard. What Leo didn't know was that Julian, the discreet restaurant manager, was ex-military intelligence. When he'd seen the raw fear on my face and heard Leo's name, he'd made a few calls of his own. He hadn't called the local police. He'd called old friends, men who operated in the shadows, who specialized in cleaning up messes like Leo Costello. Mark placed the briefcase on the floor and opened it. It was full of shredded newspaper. Leo's face contorted with rage. "You think this is a joke?" he snarled, pulling a gun. That was the signal. From the darkened corners of the warehouse, shadows detached themselves from the walls. Julian's team moved with silent, brutal efficiency. It was over in less than a minute. There were no gunshots, just the dull thuds of professionals at work. Leo and his men were disarmed and subdued before they even knew what was happening. I ran into the warehouse as Mark was untying Emily. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I went straight to Leo, who was being held by 2 imposing men. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He stared at me, his eyes promising 1,000 different kinds of revenge. I knelt down in front of him. "It's over, Leo," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You tried to use my past to destroy my future, but you underestimated my husband, and you underestimated me." We never saw Leo again. Julian assured me he was being sent somewhere very far away where he wouldn't be a problem for anyone ever again. Emily went into therapy, finally ready to confront her own demons. It took time to rebuild, both financially and emotionally. The trust between Mark and me, however, wasn't broken. It had been forged in fire, emerging stronger and more profound than ever before. Our 10-year anniversary wasn't the romantic fantasy I'd imagined, but it was the day I truly understood the depth of my husband's love, and the day I found a strength within myself I never knew existed.